Well, good morning and welcome to WACO, the Water Advisory Committee of Orange County. This is the place where elected officials from the city's water district and a selected number of experts in water get together to discuss issues related to water affecting Orange County. So if you are not here for that, then you are in the wrong place, but you're welcome to stay. I'd like to invite Director John Sears to lead us on the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country.
Thank you. In honor of this great country of ours, please join me in this pledge of allegiance. Ready to begin?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, John. And we'd like to recognize anyone who is visiting this place for the first time. I want to recognize the new director from Mesa, Maris Di Pasquale, who was actually introduced at the last meeting, but I failed to do that at the beginning, so welcome, Maris. Anybody else has something to add, any announcements? Not related to the Dodgers. Well, let me start by then announcing that it's been already 10 months, beginning 11 months since I've been chairing the meetings for WACO. And we have elections of the coordinator. Basically what we do is set up in a coordinating meeting every month and decide with the others, members of the planning group, the speakers on the subjects that we are going to approach. So if you are interested in being part of that group, please contact the chair of that selection committee, who is Mr. Phil Anthony or Larry Dick, if you are interested in putting your name for consideration of the WACO planning. Now let's start with the reports from Aqua Report by Kathy Green. Director Green.
Good morning. Not a whole lot has changed this month because the ledge is out of session. But on our long-term conservation legislation, after months of advocacy by Aqua, its members, and other stakeholders, 2 long-term conservation and water use bills, AB 1668 and SB 606, did not move before the end of the session on September 15th, and they'll be carried over until next year. With both measures now 2-year bills, Aqua will continue to engage the legislature and the Brown administration on these 2 bills to address continued concerns and to develop a workable approach to improve water efficiencies. So we need your continued support and advocacy on those 2 bills. With Water Professionals Appreciation Week, this year Aqua successfully led an effort to establish an annual Water Professionals Appreciation Week in California, and this will happen each October. The designated week, established under SCR 80 by Senator Bill Dodd, a Democrat from Napa, is a valuable opportunity to organize programs and events that educate California water customers, local elected leaders, state and federal legislators, and other key audiences on the value of water and wastewater services and the important role that water professionals play in providing these services. This year, Water Professionals Appreciation Week was held October 7th to 15th and efforts by Aqua members were showcased in the Aqua news in our October issue. So take a look. Water Storage Investment Program. Aqua's working with the California Water Commission to assist in the development of the Commission's Water Storage Investment Program, WISP. Aqua conducted a technical study that examines how California's water supply system would operate more flexibly and effectively with the addition and integrated operation of new storage capacity. The study lays out a new approach to water storage integration as the California Water Commission conducts its public process to allocate $2.7 billion from Proposition 1 to help fund water storage projects. There are 11 eligible projects now being considered by the California Water Commission, with early funding decisions expected in May and June of next year. Upcoming events. Our Aqua 2017 Fall Conference and Exhibition will be in Anaheim this year at the Anaheim Marriott Hotel from November 28th to December 1st. Hope to see you all there. Any questions? Thanks.
And Director Linda Ackerman is not here today, so to give the Met report, we'll have Director Larry McKinney.
Good morning. Good morning. So Linda always gives a fun fact, and I was going to give us the fun fact that Linda's not here, but Jose already did that, so that was the fun fact. Everything about Linda is water related. So how many of you were at neither the Met workshop meeting last week or the elected officials forum last night? A couple of people. If you guys see me afterwards, I'll give my report. No. I was thinking about what to talk about today that wouldn't bore everybody that has heard a lot of the Met stuff already. So let me just cover a couple of things quickly. The big news, obviously, from last month was the Met vote on the water fix. We had a big workup to that. We had months of pre-workshops, and we had hours and hours of combined public comment and debate at the board. And we ultimately, as most of you know, had our vote on October 12th and voted to opt in, to participate at the 26% share of the project that is Metropolitan's, and to approve the various agreements that go along with that. At this point, the state water project side of the proposed water fix has essentially voted in. Almost all the agencies that need to have voted to participate. A number of the agencies that are contractors have said that they're not going to even vote, that they're just going to follow the lead of all the people that did vote. So basically the state project side is in. The problem is that 45% of the fix is, at least in the way that the contractors have been setting this up for preliminary decisions, 45% of it is supposed to be paid for by CVP, Central Valley Project contractors. And other than Santa Clara Valley, I don't think any of the CVP contractors have voted to say that they would participate. And that reflects the fact that their calculus on this is very, very different from the state water project side. We had a fair amount of detail about that in the last couple of meetings that I mentioned, and can provide more of that to anybody that wants to hear. But basically, you've got a very different prospect for them. You've got a lot more players. You've got a lot of private interests who are making decisions about whether it makes sense for their agricultural businesses. You've got a lot more uncertainty on their side about what the ultimate cost would be, because they have more possibility for people to opt in and opt out, which would change the how much each share would be worth. And they have a lot of dependency in their potential costs based on what role the federal government plays. And the Trump administration has not been either supportive or clear on this, so there's just a lot of uncertainty for them. So where does that leave us? Well, some of us have spent a little bit of time talking with members of the administration about this, and the administration, the Brown administration, is clear at this point that we are going to move ahead, talking about some kind of a project. We're either going to continue to work on funding the fix as it is, or we're going to change it to something that fits the resources that we can marshal to move ahead with the fix. That being said, I don't want anybody here to think that the administration or Matt or anybody else are caving in to the idea that we're not going to work on downsizing the project. We see that there's a possibility of doing that. We also see that there's a very real possibility that trying to downsize the project just kills the project because of the way it changes the environmental work that's already been done, the approvals that have been gained, and the cost of the water from the project versus the benefits. But it is possible that things will still change on the Central Valley project side. The federal administration may get itself together and decide what role it wants to play, and that may change the calculus on that side a little bit. And it's also possible that some or all of the state water project contractors will decide that they're willing to just pay a little bit more to pick up more of the CVP share. So there's a number of ways that things could move forward, and I'm still optimistic that we're going to move in some direction. The message to the people that are still deciding whether to opt in or not is just be aware you're not killing the project. The project is going to move ahead without you if you don't join, and that will have consequences for your lifestyle if you depend on water from the Delta. So that was the big news for the past month, and it took a lot of the time and resources at Metropolitan, which is not to say that there weren't a lot of other issues that we were also addressing at Met. So just quickly, we had a presentation. We had a visitor in our water planning and stewardship meeting. We had Chuck Bonham from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife there to talk to us about restoration in the Delta. He gave an overview of where he thinks the administration has come as far as restoration today, what's already being done, and what's in the immediate offing, and how he's moving his department to embrace the idea that he calls reconciliation ecology, where it's not just an us or them sort of thing. They're trying to be adaptive. They're trying to work with the water industry. They're trying to work with locals and figure out what's actually achievable. And the question is, so why is Chuck Bonham at Met talking about this stuff? Well, recall that when we had the original version of the bond that passed with the Delta package, that the bond measure never moved until finally years later it became a drought relief bond, and that's Prop 1 that we have now. But when it was a Delta bond, there was $4 billion in that bond for Delta restoration. One of the reasons that was put off was because the timing wasn't urgent for it. That work is going to take place over a long period of time, and you're going to see more discussion in the future about a new state bond that will address restoration. But in the meantime, $800 million of restoration in the Delta is identified as being part of the water fix project in terms of project mitigation. So the State Department of Fish and Wildlife is very interested in the fix moving forward so that the water contractors will pay for that much restoration. In our water supply report at that committee meeting, we also heard an update on storage. We used a lot of storage, record storage usage during the drought. This year, we're putting a record amount of storage, of water into storage, more water than Met has ever put into storage in a single year before, more than 1 million acre-feet going into storage. We've been sort of bursting at the seams in terms of our capacity, but the fact remains that we have capacity to put water, particularly into groundwater banks at Metropolitan, that we've not fully used. We've realized that one of the critical constraints is the capacity for recharging water, even if you can get it. And so that points to something that we might think about in the future. And that raises another issue that I think that we are, we'll be grappling with this at Metropolitan, and as we have this ongoing discussion about what's going to happen with the fix, I always try to remind people, the water fix is about making a once every 50 years sort of investment in our community's major water system. But the Delta conveyance problem is a part of the state water project system. Oroville and the problems that we've been having there, that's a part of the state water project system. Don't forget that we also had infrastructure damage related constraints this year because of problems at the Clifton Court forebay. That's a part of the system. Last year we were dealing with problems with the aqueduct itself in the Central Valley where there were breaks in the aqueduct. That kind of ongoing maintenance and repair and capital improvement type of work is a part of the project. And now we see that perhaps maybe making sure that we've got the ability, once we move water across the Delta, to get it into storage, to get it into surface storage, to get it out of the surface storage in a timely way and into groundwater storage. That's all got to be viewed as part of the ongoing investment we make. So it's not just the fix that we're all focused on right now. But, every 50 years or so you have to invest in your infrastructure. That's the way that goes. We also had a lot of discussion about our water use efficiency program. We've had an ongoing review of the program, and the staff at Metropolitan is rolling out a few new initiatives about new ways of approaching water use efficiency. And obviously we're very aware of the fact that water use efficiency is going to continue to be a big topic in Sacramento in the new session of the legislature. So I would just note in that regard that on this coming agenda at Metropolitan, we'll be considering adopting our new state and federal legislative guidelines. So if you're interested in that, that's coming out soon. And then finally, I would note on the finance and insurance side, we had a comprehensive report at our meeting, at our committee meeting last month from our asset management team, talking about how we're managing our investments and what the economic outlook is, and you probably all get those sorts of things in your agencies. The information is online if you're interested in see how Met looks at that. And the item of interest for Met Finances is we spent a lot of money during the drought on conservation and education and taking water out of storage and taking advantage of the investments we've made in the past. This year, it's very wet. Met sales are still down, partly because demand has been low because of rain, and partly because all that work that we did on conservation still, thankfully, has an effect. And that creates an interesting situation for us, where our revenues are going to be a few $100 million below where we budgeted. Our costs are also below where we budgeted, so the immediate issue is that's not a problem. But as we go forward in the long term and we think about how we project costs, how we project water supply, it's this ongoing learning curve that we have. And so then the last large story that I would note that everybody's been paying attention to with regard to Met is the water rates litigation. So most of you probably know that the Supreme Court denied review of San Diego's request for, or its petition for review of the Court of Appeals case with regard to the 2010 and 2012 rates. So that was a big deal for Metropolitan because it really reduced the liability that come out of the trial court for that. That case is being remanded to the trial court, and hopefully we'll get that whole part of the lawsuit resolved. There are still pending lawsuits from San Diego against Met for the 2014 rates, the 2016 rates, and that case raises new issues. And then, we're going to be adopting the 2018 rates next spring. So we're not out of the woods. However, in the wake of the Supreme Court decision, there has been a sort of flurry of letters between some of the Metropolitan member agencies and some of in San Diego and some of its member agencies. And the long and the short of that now is that next week the officers of the San Diego County Water Authority Board are meeting with the officers of the Metropolitan Board to see if maybe there's a different kind of discussion we could have. That is important not only because of trying to resolve the issues in litigation and because it's such a drag on doing the business at Metropolitan when you're always dealing with the litigation issues, but because it's very difficult for us to really address at a policy level how we're going to go forward with the possibility of changing rates of sales and different kinds of investments and all that, when everything that you say about how we're going to address that is subject to being in a deposition about the existing water rates. It really dampens our policy creativity. So hopefully we'll be able to turn over a new leaf and move forward in a new direction. Hopefully that didn't bore the people that have already been here, and it caught everybody else up. And can I take a question from Fred, or am I allowed?
Yes.
Okay.
Nobody's talking about status of Oroville repairs at the spillway. Did they meet the November 1st?
Yes, they did. Yeah, as of Wednesday, the Oroville spillway was reported for duty, functional, ready for action. I would remind everybody that the plan has been that that's a two-phase repair. By November 1st, in anticipation of the rainy season coming, they needed to get the spillway functional, and so there were large parts of the work that were done on a permanent standard, and there were parts that are temporarily repaired, and the intent is to go back next dry season, and hopefully that won't be too soon, and complete the permanent side of those repairs.
Next time you lead a statewide project, maybe we go check out the dam, unlike the last time.
Yeah. We'll get you out there and let you boogie board down the spillway. Right. Yeah.
Where can we get a presentation on the lessons learned at the Oroville? We had a presentation here that talked about what happened, in the middle of the so-called disaster. But it would be very beneficial, I think, to understand lessons learned point of view, what went on there, and how we could avoid these things in the future, and what corrective action we should take.
Yeah, it would be an interesting topic. I'm quite confident that some of the folks on the Metropolitan staff could give a presentation like that. We've been watching it very closely, but I think it would be far better to get somebody from DWR to come down to WACO and do that presentation. So I'm sure that Jose is on it. He's already made a note. But I'm sure they'd be proud to tell the story, because as it is right now, they've done a phenomenal job of recovering. And there has been a fair amount of forensic work into what happened, and it does point to some flaws. It doesn't look like anything criminal, and so I'm sure that they'd be happy to come down and talk about it.
This is exactly how engineers learn
Oh, yeah.
in the long run.
Yeah.
By design, thinking.
Yeah, well, and it's particularly relevant because there's so much more infrastructure of that type here in the state. We need to learn as we go.
Okay,
Thanks.
you. So we're trying to get somebody from the state here to talk about it. Keep in mind that when you're going to say something official about it, you have to have the lawyer's permission to say it, because things happen and liability is a big issue. So the main subject of today's presentation, the main speaker, is well known by many. His name is Kevin Hardy, and he is the executive director of the National Water Research Institute. Kevin's background in public administration started with a master's degree in public administration from the San Diego State University and a JD degree from the School of Law at the University of San Diego. Within the water sector, he served 7 years as a general manager and 14 years as an executive of the Encina Wastewater Authority, a public agency that provides recycled water, resource recovery, and wastewater treatment in San Diego County. In addition, he is a past president of CASA, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, and the California Sanitation Risk Management Authority. Kevin has identified several goals for the nonprofit under his leadership, such as working with policymakers to continue developing regulations for potable reuse, building upon relationships with public and private agencies, and facilitating NWRI's well-established expert panel to help guide technological innovations and policies that shape the future of the water in the United States. Kevin is it's well known. I know Kevin by emails. We worked for 14 years through emails until finally met his face 2 years ago. That's to tell you how the internet has changed the way we do business. It used to be that we go there and meet in San Diego, but through the internet, and finally now we are affirming our friendship through meeting in person. Kevin is a dynamic person, and I think it's a gain for the region. He has, besides his knowledge and experience, has that enthusiastic spirit that I'm sure is going to bring NWRI to the front again. Kevin?
Well, thank you, Jose, and I appreciate everyone being here this morning. I kind of thought about how I was going to approach this subject and talk for an hour. I lamented to both my wife and my staff that how can anybody talk for an hour about anything? And they both kind of just looked at me blankly as if I was crazy because they know I can talk for an hour about just about anything. But as you can hear as you heard from my introduction, I need everybody to be nice to me today because I'm a recovering San Diegan. I'm a recovering general manager, and I'm a recovering attorney. So everybody go gentle. I'm having a day, but what I want to do is before I screw this presentation up, I want to make sure we get it going. And tell me when I'm there, Suzanne. Is that it? There we go. Good. So I want you to just take a moment to imagine a world where every place where humans live, there's no pristine water left. There's no pristine water left. And frankly, where the notion of pristine water, this beautiful babbling brook that gives you health, springs forward from the earth, is really kind of a fallacy. In a world where we can measure constituents in just about anything down to parts per billion, and we're actually moving into parts per trillion, but when you look at the data, you're not really certain what it all means. It's a tough world, and I think that, frankly, there's a really good argument that's the world that we live in today. And so I want to talk a little bit about direct potable reuse and how the development of direct potable use policies here in California, thank you, have developed over the last few years. But before we do that, I want you to picture that in your mind because I want to tell you about my pristine water as I grew up, because I believed as a young person, like most people believe, that, hey, water is pristine. We can play in rivers. I grew up in Oklahoma. Maybe you played in the Truckee River or the Forks of the Kern or someplace in Big Sur. But I grew up in Oklahoma, and where we played out in just north of Oklahoma City in the Cimarron River. And the Cimarron River, we thought, was a great place to play. We'd go down there and fish, and we'd shoot guns. We'd have a great time. We had no idea that the Kerr-McGee uranium factory was about 5 miles up the road. So ignorance is bliss, right? But if I start to glow, just let me know. We're going to talk a little bit about NWRI's initiatives this morning, kind of set the stage. I want to give a big picture, a little bit about international and national risks as we've seen them through our expert panel program over the last 6 months or so, and then talk about solution portfolios. DPRs is a subset of those solution portfolios. A little bit about NWRI. Was founded in 1991, I think, as most of you know. It's a joint powers agency and a 501c3 nonprofit. And our mission is to do research, development, and implementation of any projects that are designed or to contribute to the knowledge of managing water resources, enhancing water quality or supply, encouraging water conservation, preventing or remediating the degradation of water quality, protecting the beneficial uses of water resources, or improving public awareness and education with respect to water resource issues, which means we can do just about anything we want to in the water space. And we have done a lot of different things over the years. A little bit about myself so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. I was appointed executive director in April 2017. It's been a really good run. I'm really enjoying the work that we're doing. I have about 30 years of municipal utility experience. I started with the city of San Diego, worked for the city of Chula Vista, and went to Encina at about the 10-year mark of my career and spent 20 years there. So I've been thinking about these issues deeply for a long time. And they're meaningful to me, and so I'm glad I get to talk to you a little bit about that this morning. Also, in full disclosure to my Met friends, Mike Hogan and I worked together for 20 years. And so I've got a chance to watch Mike transition from a wastewater treatment plant operator to a guy who's leading the San Diego County Water Authority and now working on the executive committee at Met, which is really gratifying to me because he worked really hard to get there. So that's my spiel about Mike. And I just recently moved to Newport Beach. I don't know how many times you guys move, but moving is not fun. I moved to Newport Beach. A lot of love to Mr. Cook and his organization. They've been wonderful as I've become a new customer of the Irvine Ranch Water District. NWRI's panel program, let's talk about that real quick. Its purpose is to help public agencies review challenging water management policy issues, lead to informed policy decisions. Who we work with are water and wastewater agencies. We work with local, county, and state agencies. And we work with research and industry organizations. The value of those panel programs are to validate the project's objectives, to look at and validate the approach of the project, and to monitor progress. We've had, in fact, the mother of all NWRI panels, the Santa Ana River Monitoring Panel, is going to happen next week, and that's been going on for almost 20 years. We work to assure public and to provide credibility. This is difficult for communities, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later. Some of these projects raise a lot of issues for people, and having credibility for the public, as this group knows, is crucial. And ultimately what we do is provide and promote sound investment in public policy decisions. Third-party review and evaluation, scientific technical advice by leading experts. We were talking to people before the meeting, and I'm always trying to recruit experts. We're always looking for smart people who've got either practical experience or have academic research background. So if you know anybody who's interested in these issues and has a background, please refer them to me because we always need our roster of experts to grow. But again, we help with challenging scientific questions, document status, and assist with interactions with the public, which frankly has been an area where we've had a lot of success. We have active panels on for NWRI across the United States. You see, really happy to be working at Hampton Roads, Virginia right now. They've got an incredible project that's led by a wastewater agency. So they've got a massive aquifer, 1,100 square miles. It's suffering from the same sorts of issues that the Central Valley is right now, and a wastewater agency has decided to take that on. So it's been a very interesting pull. But as you can see, we have a number of other panels, mostly located here in California. They're ongoing right now. And we've got completed DPR panels across the United States, looking from Texas, where they're actually doing a DPR project, Cloudcroft, New Mexico, where they looked to implement direct potable use, a very small town, kind of high up in the mountains, so very different from El Paso. And then you can see the number of projects that you're all somewhat familiar with here in California as well. So the DPR, so the NWRI panel program is kind of the heart of what we do, and has been really important in informing the views that I'm going to share with you this morning. So, who cares anyway? At the Clark Prize Conference last week, which is our marquee event every year, and I'd love any of you going to come to the Clark Prize event, come to dinner. Want to work with WACO next year, make sure we get really good presence from water agencies across the county. We had Dr. Robert Glennon come and give the keynote speech. And he shared these facts with us, and I think they're kind of telling. You got 1.1 billion human beings that lack access to safe drinking water. There's 2.6 billion humans that lack adequate sanitation, and 1.8 billion humans die every year from waterborne disease. They're kind of stunning numbers, and it's really important because when you talk about DPR, you can't have safe drinking water through DPR if you don't have sanitation. So these numbers matter. What it comes down to is that you look around the world, we're competing for resources. This is not new. It's been going on for the history of man. This is a map from the International Resource Institute. Their estimate is going to be 8 billion human beings by 2025. That's a lot of people. And whether you believe that number or not, there's a lot of human beings on planet Earth that are competing for resources. It's clearly increasing urbanization. And as you can see by this map, where the darker the color, the faster water risk is increasing. You can see when I was kind of shocked by Greenland. You think, well, I've got Greenland, I have plenty of water. They've got a serious water problem. But it's being exacerbated by where you're at on climate change. There's a lot of people who are concerned about what climate change is going to do to the availability of water. Across the world, corruption is a big issue. We can't get away from it. It's kind of a dirty word to talk about, but the fact of the matter is that in a lot of places in the world, water projects don't move forward because of corruption. And frankly, there's a lot of conflict in the world. There's a website that's part of this Resource Institute that inventories the conflicts that have been fought in the human existence over water. And it's a stunningly long list. So people fight over water. It's not just San Diego and Met suing each other. There are people shooting guns at one another. On a national level, we got, that's interesting. On a national challenges, those are the same numbers, so I don't know exactly why we have those, but let's go to the picture. That shows you my quality control is lacking. But the thing that's interesting here, I love this picture. This is another picture that I stole from Glennon. This picture, to me, kind of says it all about what we're doing. From a development standpoint, on your left, you've got beautiful homes. People living good lives, They've got swimming pools full of water. And right next door is obviously a desert, and that's taken from somewhere in the Palm Desert area. But nationally, our challenges really are down to things that we understand they're a problem. Whether it's antibiotic resistance or other chemicals of emerging concern, you've got these disinfection byproducts, you've got lead in the water, PFOA and PFOS are big issues in this basin. These water quality issues are really, really important. They're really complicated, too. We understand that these elements create a situation where people can get sick. And we understand it on a macro level, but when you get down to the micro level and you talk to very intelligent people, they have very different points of view about what it all means. We also have a challenge about attitudes and awareness. One of the things that have really struck me over the last 6 months are the stunning lack of appreciation for simple things like what a miracle it is to turn on a faucet and have clean water that's not going to kill you come out of the faucet. It really is stunning. And you ask people, I saw a survey where I asked people, hey, what happens to your wastewater when you flush the toilet? And the most common answer was, it goes under my house, which is, I don't know how the forced choices were set up, and they're kind of right, but it's only part of the answer. And I think that's one of the things that as we move forward on DPR projects, we're going to have to really work on people's attitudes to understand both the pristine water issue that we talked about at the very top of this presentation, and this idea of that there's a big infrastructure out there that we got to maintain to keep a healthy world. And that infrastructure is aging. There's all kinds of estimates out there. I won't get into a lot of technical details this morning. I wanted to keep it high level. But we all know that managing our assets is a critical component of managing a water district. And infrastructure is aging around the United States. And frankly, the water's scarce. You look out in the hallway, you see how much water is on Earth, 2.5% of it available for human consumption. We all know that issue. And with these emerging contaminants of concern, that number is shrinking. And frankly, we just kind of hit on this issue earlier in the Met presentation. Pricing is an issue. When you set an entire market up based on consumption, and where now the real function, the real hard costs are fixed, how are we going to price water in the future? But these are things that we understand in a certain way, that we're working on them, and I think in a meaningful way. And these are challenges, but they're not a challenge that we can't overcome. But they're going to affect how we move forward on direct potable reuse solutions. So what are the solution portfolios that are out there that water districts are working on? Hey, the big one right now, one of the big ones is One Water, this concept where you see advocacy, agencies working together, you see utilities working together to bring these projects online. There's one thing that every DPR project needs, right? It needs supply. That comes from a wastewater utility. Sometimes when you've got bifurcated water and wastewater utilities, you got to find a way to work together. You also see it on kind of a global scale, not a global scale, but a national scale, where just this week the Water Environment Research Federation and the Water Research Federation took the next step in their merger together to create a single water research enterprise. And you also see it with agencies like WACO and CASA, water reuse, working together to provide a more coherent and a more focused message when they're advocating in D.C. and in Sacramento. Another big part of the solution portfolio I think that we can all appreciate is data. We're seeing big data impact in a positive way on every sphere of our life. And there's no reason for our ratepayers to think or believe that they shouldn't see their water utilities be improved, their efficiency, their delivery, their customer service be improved with big data. So this is a trend that we've seen a lot of investment in, and people are excited about. Fit-for-purpose water is a third solution set, and we'll talk a lot about that here in a few minutes, but the idea that there isn't one answer for every community, there isn't one answer for a supply problem, but there's a whole array of concepts that can work. This concept of fit-for-purpose water, I think the first example of it that I'm aware of kind of arose from West Basin when they had their designer water, and now that idea is starting to resonate in the larger community of water utilities. Clearly, water conservation is going to be part of the solution. As we look forward, every water agency, every wholesale water agency, every retail water agency is building a slice of their water supply portfolio for conservation. So it's important to continue to look at water use efficiency and ways that we can conserve more water. Project delivery is another area where we're seeing a lot of movement. The whole design, build, own, operate, all those DBLs, letters and stuff. What these represent are innovative ways to deliver that make sense for the communities that they're in, and these are important concepts, especially in the world of DPR. And finally, there's a lot of research left to be done. So as you look at how is the broader community approaching these concepts related to water reuse, and especially DPR, each of these areas have an important piece of the puzzle for every community. And so let's drill down a little bit on this fit-for-purpose water, because one of the things about fit-for-purpose water is we're talking about is DPR. You guys all are aware about AB 574, but I think it's important to kind of set it out and kind of remember that it's out there. It was signed into law on October 6th, set some new definitions out there for different sorts of water. We'll go over that in a little bit. But the goal of it is to establish uniform water recycling criteria by December of 2023. Now, there's some extensions in there for extenuating circumstances. I'm not necessarily sure that we'll have it by 2023, but the policy mandate is there for the State Water Board to come up with uniform water recycling criteria that will support DPR by then. It's going to require an expert panel review, and hopefully NWRI will have an ongoing role there. And they've asked for a framework for regulations by June of 18, and that framework was laid out, I think, fairly well in the feasibility report that NWRI completed back in 2016. And the other thing that it requires is that the research that was identified by that expert panel be completed in advance of 2023. So there's a big initiative through Water Environment Research Federation trying to get together a number of stakeholders and get that research underway and finished. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about direct potable reuse. I put a picture up here. This is a report that NWRI published, as I mentioned, on the feasibility of direct potable reuse. It was adopted by the State Board last year, and it sets forth a number of concepts. And so if you're thinking about pretreatment in your role, the first thing you got to think about, and the first issue I want you to be aware of, is pretreatment. So in the wastewater world, pretreatment is familiar to everyone. In the water world, it's not quite as familiar, but the idea of pretreatment is that in a Clean Water Act world of the 1970s and early 80s, where massive investment was going to be made in clean water infrastructure, it was important that contributors to that system and into that wastewater treatment plant that the federal government was funding would not put things into the sewer system that would kill the biological treatment process at the wastewater treatment plant. So, as a part of the Clean Water Act, the idea of pre-treatment was to not interfere with the wastewater treatment plant. Don't kill the biology. Allow the treatment plant to keep working, and that gave the authority for these wastewater utilities to go out and regulate businesses within their service area and determine with them in a collaborative process what they could put in the drain and what they had to manage in another way. But notice that the object of that pretreatment program was to protect the biology in the wastewater treatment, prevent interference with the wastewater treatment plant. As we switch to DPR, if you're thinking about moving to DPR and you have a wastewater utility lined up, pretreatment to protect public health in a drinking water context is a different objective than protecting a wastewater treatment plant. This is recognized in the research. It's going to be one of in fact, the very first panel that we've already got a contract with the State Water Board to initiate a panel that's going to look at enhanced pretreatment. We're going to get experts from all over the world, from places that have been engaged in direct potable reuse for long periods of time, Singapore, PUB. We're going to have people from Orange County Water District, or the Sanitation District rather, where they had to already implement an enhanced source control program for this very purpose. We're going to have experts, academic experts from all over the United States join on that panel. But the takeaway from pretreatment is that the object of protecting a wastewater treatment plant is very different than protecting public health. And so as you begin to partner with wastewater utilities, make sure you understand what their pretreatment program allows and doesn't allow. And I think that recognize, I'll tell you, that one of the toughest days I had as a general manager is having to fine a small business in our service area for putting something down the drain that they shouldn't have. Their permit said you couldn't do it. They did it repeatedly. It takes a while to find them. It's kind of a whodunit scenario in any big wastewater system. You kind of got to eliminate pieces and kind of work your way up the stream until you find it. And we found this one business, and these small business owners are making tough decisions every day. Do I make payroll, or do I pay to have this stuff hauled off that I don't really think is a big deal? And then they come in, they're like, hey, this is un-American. You can't do this. Next thing you know, they're talking to elected officials saying, this general manager's, what's wrong with this clown? He can't tell me how to run my business. I got to make payroll. Well, this goes on for a whole legal process. By the end of it, they realize that one thing is going to happen, one or the other is going to happen. They're either going to pay their fine or someone's going to jail. And if I don't enforce a pretreatment ordinance as a general manager of a wastewater utility, I'm going to jail. And if they don't get their act together and stop discharging stuff they can't discharge, they're going to jail. So there's a lot of teeth in these pretreatment ordinances. They impact your community, your business community. I think it's important to understand some of the ramifications so you can make good decisions on DPR programs in the future. The other thing is, if you don't understand wastewater treatment, give yourself a primer on it. It's pretty simple. You either you slow it down, you screen it, you speed it up, you slow it down, you separate out the water and solids, and at the end of the day, you end up with pretty clean water and you end up with some solids. Well, this is why entities like the Encino Wastewater Authority exist, is because city managers back in the clean water, they did not want to deal with biosolids. Biosolids is a whole different subject today, but realize that if you begin to partner with wastewater utilities, they've got a real focus on resource recovery and on dealing with biosolids and managing those biosolids products from the wastewater treatment process. And that's important to you. You want to know what are in those biosolids, because those give you some insight as to what's left in the water. And knowing how those biological processes and the various unit treatment processes from wastewater help inform downstream decisions about infrastructure and systems that you might invest in. So give yourself a little primer on wastewater treatment. You can get really deep into it. Goldman can give you the PhD version on it back there. But what you really got to know is that there are different processes out there, and you need to understand how the utility that you're working with manages their wastewater treatment. Water recycling is obviously another issue that you got to understand in the area of water reuse. The same concepts apply to recycling as they do to wastewater treatment. You just have to understand what the assets of the utility that you're partnering with are, and then what level of treatment do they do at that utility. Do they have a call for other recycled water? Do they have a plan long term for that water, or is that water that you can leverage in the future? If utilities have made big investments in water recycling, it's going to take them a little longer to transition those assets into a direct potable reuse unless they've got additional flow that they don't already have committed to other uses. So understanding your partner agency's water recycling posture will help you make good investment decisions downstream. Advanced water treatment is probably one of the most critical areas from a policy standpoint at the state level. Right now, there is a mandated train for DPR. You can only do it one way, right? It requires secondary treatment, MF, microfiltration, reverse osmosis, advanced oxidation, UV. That's that process train. We were in a panel in San Diego a couple of weeks ago, and the city of San Diego in their pure water program is promoting a fairly aggressive system that's going to go another level higher on that train, but it's a little different too. So we had a little moment of clarity. I think the state board has finally realized that the time has come for them to begin the process of understanding alternative treatment trains to this one given train, and that understanding has come about from just a reality check that communities have different challenges and that not every community can follow one treatment train. So advanced water treatment is an important thing to understand as you think about DPR. Now, as I kind of highlighted these green things, we're starting to get into some of the stuff with AB 574 and what have you. Raw water augmentation is a DPR concept, right? This is the idea that you're delivering direct potable reuse advanced treated water into a raw water supply, like, say, a pipeline, an aqueduct that leads in and then delivers water ultimately to a treatment plant. You have treated drinking water augmentation. This is on the other side of the treatment plant. So you're actually going to put the idea that you're going to flange direct potable reuse water into treated water already, which is going to go directly to a customer. That's kind of the concept, I think, now that we've thought of before AB 574 as flange to flange. Indirect potable reuse for groundwater recharge is what's going on here in Orange County. It's going on around in the entire LA basin, and this idea is probably it's the proven concept. It's kind of the starting point for the work and for the regulatory work, and frankly has given. I've seen the way the regulators interact with the Orange County Water District and Sand District on the groundwater replenishment project, and they view it as the gold standard for indirect potable reuse for groundwater recharge in California. And many of the projects that come behind or in planning right now, they may use alternative trains. That's going to be a tough issue for them, right? That, how do I leverage resources and my investments the right way? How do I get there? Ultimately, they're going to have to prove that their water is protective of public health along the same lines as the Orange County Water District has. Reservoir water augmentation, another term, as all these ones that are kind of highlighted in green were redefined through AB 574 to kind of bring a more specific focus to what it means, is exactly what it says. They're going to put water into a reservoir. And that sounds good if you've got a reservoir that's really big. It's a little more challenging if the reservoir is really small.
That's direct potable resource.
I'm sorry?
That's direct.
Well, yeah, it is direct, yeah, right? I'm just giving you the terms from 574. So in San Diego, where they're at is their original plan was to go into a very large reservoir. They're now going to a very small reservoir and have changed kind of the tenor of the conversation. So interesting developments on there. And then I think another thing, in fact, we're going to a workshop next week, the real unknown here is this idea of on-site reuse. And there are a lot of concepts there. They range from buildings that have been in construction, in operation projects in New York City for a decade using gray water on site. There's a lot of initiative in San Francisco right now to look at potable reuse on site. This goes into the fit for purpose. Do we use it just do we use it for toilet water? Do we use it to wash our clothes? And how do we ensure these systems work? The issues there are really tough because instead of having a utility standing there as the operator and having the liability and the responsibility to protect public health, how do you create a scenario within a building where someone is responsible for public health? What happens if something goes wrong? How do you know something went wrong? You got a smaller system, probably remotely monitored. Who's responsible? Who operates it? Who maintains it? On what schedule? How is it enforced? Ultimately, can it be enforced? There's a lot of questions with on-site reuse, but we're working on projects. People are thinking about these issues, and it's important that as from elected officials in kind of a big picture, that you've got a sense that these kind of projects are going forward, and each of them have not only do they have this specific line of inquiry that you have to have for that particular kind of project, but your decisions can be informed by what's going on in all of these areas. So be aware that these concepts are out there, inquire about them, learn about them, and they can help inform your investment decisions downstream. So I've been now to half a dozen panels where we've talked about potable reuse. And so there's certain things that I think are accelerators that you just have to understand are out there and they're real, and that without them, these projects are very difficult. And the first one is that there's got to be a community imperative. If you're living I suppose if you're living someplace where you got all the water you need, maybe your portfolio doesn't need to include a direct potable reuse project. But if you live in most of California, whether it's Porterville, where there's literally no water, or here in Southern California, where the demand for water exceeds the amount of rainfall that falls into our streams and how much water we can take from the Colorado River, and we look at our deficit over time, there has to be a community imperative, or it just doesn't make sense, right? So I think that's kind of an obvious concept. The other thing it takes, though, is sophisticated leadership. It doesn't matter whether you're the Soquel Creek Water District, the Orange County Water District. These kind of projects, because of the challenges, the technical challenges they pose, the delivery challenges they pose, the public health challenges they pose, require sophisticated leadership. Not just at a board level, but the board level's leadership is incredibly important. You've got to have board, you have to have management, and you have to have operations and maintenance staff that are all very sophisticated in order to finance, to build, to maintain, to operate these systems in a way that's protective of public health. And this idea, this management capacity concept is something that was important to the DPR expert panel, and I think will continue to be. But without sophisticated leadership, these projects really don't move very quickly, and they tend to kind of fizzle out. Thought about this one for a while, but I think that the concept is really financial readiness. These projects, even where you have community imperative and you've got sophisticated leadership, the community has to be ready to make the investment. Investments, the idea of investing in utility and water infrastructure is not really well understood in the community. And from time to time, these can be challenges, especially for elected officials. Rates are things that can get people unelected. And so as you look at the long-term idea of DPR, this idea of being ready financially, understanding how it affects your current capital improvement program, understanding how it affects your rates moving forward, have proven to be very thorny for the utilities that we've worked with. And that's been consistent across very small communities and very large communities. So financial readiness is another accelerator for DPR. One of the other things that's really important is to have vertical integration. That means having a supply, right? We mentioned this earlier. If you don't have any wastewater, you can't do a DPR project. And so there has to be a high level of cooperation between a wastewater utility and a water utility. And so it's not surprising that you see the leaders in this field are utilities that have got good synergies, right? You see the Sand District and the Water District are the perfect example. But you see it in San Diego, too, where you have the wastewater utility and the water utility are part of the same governmental enterprise. So they've got an advantage there as well. Where you have disintegration of the utilities, where you have independent utilities on both the water and wastewater side, these relationships can be complicated. There are some places, say in the example of the MET and the LADWP demonstration project, there's a history for cooperation between the agencies, and there's some legacy there that can be leveraged to deliver the project. In other communities, it's not quite as easy. For instance, in Santa Cruz, we're working now with the Soquel Creek Water District. There's complete disintegration between the city of Santa Cruz's wastewater utility and the Soquel Creek Water District. They're separate entities. They're separated geographically, different, although there's some overlapping, but there's different constituencies, and they're really having a tough time. Even though the wastewater utility wants to cooperate, it's not as easy as it sounds sometimes. So the way you tell one of these projects has got a chance to move forward is you've got this vertical integration of wastewater supply and a water utility that's willing to move forward. Another thing that's really important, and it's more important today, and I suppose there's some concepts out in the future that maybe this wouldn't be so important, but be prepared to make an investment in piloting and demonstrating a particular sort or range of treatment alternatives on your site. Without doing this, you open a door that uncertainty walks into. There's so much uncertainty in these sorts of projects. Anywhere you can get data that is related to your water in your community using the treatment trains that you are going to use, I would encourage you very strongly to do that. And in addition, don't be afraid to just settle on one because a consulting engineer says that's the one to use. Be willing to look at alternative treatment trains. Don't be afraid to use alternative provisions as long as they exist, as long as they've got this one treatment train concept out there at the state water board level. Remember that Title 22 provides for these alternative provisions. So you can get them. They're maybe a little bit more complicated to permit, but they can be permitted if you pilot and demonstrate and work with the state water board to prove that they're protective of public health. And finally, the other thing that really works well in these DPR projects to accelerate them is this what I call this nature infrastructure leveraging. And so an example of nature leveraging is that in San Diego County, where I worked at the Encino Wastewater Authority, we didn't have any groundwater basins to speak of. So as we looked forward to DPR, our ideas were related, well, how can we figure out a way to get our water, our advanced treated water, into some kind of pipeline, get it over the hill and deliver it into the Met system. That's that raw water augmentation concept. We have to do that because that's the infrastructure that's available to us, and there's no natural infrastructure for us to use. Here in Orange County, in Los Angeles, in the groundwater, you got this massive groundwater basin. In fact, I'm reminded every day as I kind of drive down the hill into Orange County of just how massive the bowl is here. It's an incredible resource, and the Water District over time has really managed it very well, as have the other dischargers and the other pumpers, the other water utilities in terms of managing the groundwater basin. But they've leveraged that asset. So whether it's the existing infrastructure in your community, the treatment plant, the piping infrastructure, the groundwater or basins, whatever it might be, you have to look to leverage that infrastructure and nature to make your project make sense. And so in the communities where we see utilities looking to leverage these concepts, they're having a better time and an easier time moving forward with their potable reuse project. And with that, I'd open up to questions. I didn't use my whole time, but I wanted to keep the project kind of at a high level and leave each of you with one thought, which is to realize that, as I have over the last 6 months, that all the answers aren't there. Chuck Haas said it really well when he was giving his laureate's message at the Clark Prize. He, as a young engineer in the early 70s, had a professor who told him, I don't understand why you're going to get into environmental engineering, because we're going to have all of our problems solved in 25 years. You're not going to have any problem. There's nothing to do. I don't understand what you get in. You need to get into civil engineering. And think about that. 25 years later, I think there are frankly more questions than there are answers. I think the questions are better refined, they're more nuanced, and they're more scientifically based. But the questions are still there. And so what I would say is that your challenge is to figure out what is all this stuff, what are these constituents? What do these questions around how we accelerate? How do we transform those issues into opportunities for our communities? And if you make the decision to move forward in direct potable reuse, my challenge to you is to figure out what it means for your community and move forward in a way that is makes sense for your community, because the only way these projects move forward is when they do so in a way that makes sense for the community that they ultimately serve. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might want to ask.
Fred, Doug, and Betty.
Alan, you talk about aging infrastructure. Some of the areas that is looking at specifically this concept of infrastructure sustainability is certainly a big topic on the treated side as it is on the wastewater side. Is NWRI looking at developing some sort of a panel, or what you call it, or a focus group that looks at that issue as it relates to the, whether it's direct potable or any other aspect of water recycling or wastewater treatment?
I think it's a good idea. We haven't really thought about it. I mean, at this point, kind of one of the big initiatives for NWRI is to get through this first year with me at the helm. We've kind of kept the program that we've got going now moving forward, but we're going to sit down with our 6-member agencies here at the end of the year and into the spring and do some strategic planning and make some kind of resourcing decisions about where it makes sense. And I think that infrastructure sustainability concept is really important.
Yeah, I just think it's great to we all plan ahead and focus on, from my perspective, I'm just a water resources planner. I'm not a well-known engineer like my colleague here to my right, who knows about the ins and outs of engineering. But we can plan all we want, but if the infrastructure isn't there, if it's not maintained for and planned for replacement, I'm saying the obvious, but then a lot of this is just kind of coming and going through the wayside. You know what I'm saying? It's obvious, but sometimes it's not obvious. So.
Well, that's one of the challenges we have. You saw I put our kind of mission up there. When you can do everything, kind of how do you make that decision? I think strategic planning will help us there.
Can we have Doug?
Yeah, Kevin, 2 questions. First, I'm a little confused when you talk about like a local building project where they're gonna do DPR. If it's not for drinking, how does that make a DPR? I mean, you use reclaimed water for flushing toilets and that, so I don't get if it doesn't equate to actually drinking it, how that makes a DPR. And then the other question is, I've kind of lost over the last year or so track of Big Springs, where they're at in their DPR project.
The last one.
Big Springs, Texas.
Oh, Big Spring, okay. Let's see, start top. So the on-site concept, it ranges from promoters of projects who would just do gray water and irrigate landscape, all the way to promoters who believe in the idea of producing drinking water on-site. And so there are large buildings, there are building developers who see water risk in a number of areas and would also like to promote that kind of green concept in their business plan. So that's kind of a strategic focus for them. And they've got ideas that the technology exists to make drinking water from wastewater inside of a building.
Because if you don't drink it, it's not really, I mean, we've got a hotel coming in that's going to be flushed with reclaimed water. So the first hotel in California that I know of.
Sure, yeah, there absolutely are.
So
the big, well, the
it's not
big,
DPR.
well, yeah, it's not DPR, but what it is an entree into direct potable reuse. And I think what I was trying to point out there is that there are utilities in California that are looking right now at on-site potable reuse systems. And as that work progresses, because of the technical sophistication of that project, I think it could help utilities that are thinking about more traditional forms of water reuse. I think that there might be some information there that would be beneficial to them. And you want to be aware of it. And as far as Big Springs, Texas is concerned, that project stopped. I don't know if it rained. I don't know if they got an alternative supply, but Big Spring was fairly far down the path, and they decided to stop. And that was similar, the same concept happened in Cloudcroft, where they got really far down the pathway of creating a direct potable reuse system, and then just decided for a lot of different reasons not to use it.
So if you are looking across the nation at these kinds of projects, is there a sweet spot between the aging of infrastructure that's going to have to be replaced? And because these technologies that you're talking about, there's so many choices and there's so many different cost profiles, is there a sweet spot between what you see in terms of what communities are willing to commit in this new infrastructure and an aging infrastructure happening at the same time? And I mean, sort of what is the factor that brings agencies to the point where they say, hey, we're kind of ready to go?
Okay. Yeah, I think there is a sweet spot, and I think that's the challenge. There's a sweet spot out there, right? And I think that's the challenge for every utility, is to find that sweet spot given the array of resources that are at their disposal, whether they're natural resources, infrastructure resources, existing stuff that's got to be replaced. So, hey, where is it that we can plug in this project and take advantage of those synergies? So there isn't a generalized sweet spot that I can say, here's where it is. But I think for every community that has to consider direct potable reuse as part of their water portfolio, there is a sweet spot, or at least there's a sweet spot in the context of the premise that we're moving forward on. What was the second part of your question?
Well, just how did that fit with the notion of aging infrastructure? Is there a place where you see communities making these decisions because they've got a pocket of infrastructure that is going to need to be dealt with at some point in time?
Yeah, I'm not sure that aging infrastructure per se is a driver, but I think that integrating the replacement or rehabilitation of that infrastructure gets folded in to give the project additional synergy, both from a technical and a financial standpoint.
One of them. Same thing. It's the glare. You can't see which one it is. So Metropolitan right now is implementing a pilot project with LA County Sanitation District to look at doing a large IDR project, Carson Treatment Plant. And just about the time that project, that pilot project was about to be scoped and launched is when the Potable Reuse panel came out with its feasibility findings and identified the remaining research questions that need to be addressed. Is Met staff working with you at all on how we can make sure that our pilot helps to answer those research questions?
Yeah, so the Met staff is working really closely with the Water Environment and Research Federation, who has taken the lead with the Department of Drinking Water, who control the financial resources that are going to fund this research to figure out where they can fit in. So they've been very active in the DPR coalition that it's been in. The DPR coalition has been around for probably 5 years now, something that is a joint effort of a number of utilities across the country to promote this idea. And in the research projects, Met has been very active. Just recently, they issued a request for proposals for their expert panel for their demonstration project, and so don't know what the outcome of that's going to be, but it's very clear that the work that Met is doing kind of pulls together a lot of the concepts that I talked about today in terms of leveraging the regional infrastructure, in terms of looking at alternative treatment trains that make sense for their infrastructure and for their community, and the kind of things that they want to do given their supply of wastewater. So they've been really they're taking, as usual, a pretty sophisticated approach to this idea.
Kevin, that was a softball you missed. Met isn't a member of NWRI, right?
Question here. Come true, Kevin.
No, we saw millions of acre feet of fresh water go out between the river feet this year because of flood control. I didn't see any entries that dealt with flood control, which obviously in Northern California, it has
Big
some
deal.
importance.
Yeah, right. My niece.
So where does it fit?
Well, I think that fits in the conservation concept,
Well, yeah.
kinda. But I didn't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But now you brought it up here. I'll talk about it. That's okay. I got a niece who's 14. She had never seen the yellow bypass full of water. And you want to know about how much water is coming off those mountains and what happened in the Central Valley and why they built a city right there. I'm not so sure, but I got to get it high enough now for at least as long as the levees hold. But yeah, a massive amount of water. This idea around stormwater capture, which is one of the alternatives that communities will bring forward. Like, why would we make an investment in direct potable reuse infrastructure when all this water is going to the ocean? And it's a tough question. But there's a big problem with saying, well, we'll capture, we know that in 3 storms, half of our water that we need comes down. Well, it sounds great. We'll put up an inflatable dam and we'll capture a torrent. That's got some pretty significant public health ramifications. So yeah, flood control is a big deal. And as we go through this evolution of kind of returning some of our rivers to a more natural state, the obvious trade-off is how do we build in flood control facilities into those. There's a great project up in Napa with the Napa River where they've kind of reconstituted the river as it flows through downtown.
Keep pushing it out.
Yeah, right. And they built an amphitheater, and the amphitheater is just this giant stormwater capture thing. So there are ways that folks can, that utilities can find a way to kind of find that sweet spot in their situation, but it's going to be a tough issue. This idea that we can capture stormwater and that's going to solve everything, I think it's a little optimistic.
Don?
Question, this is a great technical review of the research that's going to move this possibility along. My question is, what are we doing on the public perception side to move that along so they can sort of match up in 2023? And we've seen a lot of major failure with recycled water use, groundwater storage, indirect, in the past, going back 20 years in the San Fernando Valley,
Yep.
in upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District, and the breweries up there, and toilets to tap. I mean, we're making inroads.
Yeah.
But this is another insignificant inroad And so the question is, what are we doing on the public perception front?
What I should say here is that every utility that we're working with to consider a direct potable reuse project has public awareness very high on their priority list. They've done everything from literally the project engineer, putting together a trailer on the weekend with their interns, to really sophisticated public awareness campaigns like you see out here in the hallway and through tours and what have you, and everything in between. There's a lot of skepticism in the community, and I led this conversation with this idea about pristine water. There seems to be this idea that pristine water exists, and I'm here to tell you I don't think it does. I think that that's not a knock on anything. It's just a reality that as we can measure things, we see that there's chemicals and viruses and pathogens of all sorts. And pretty much, if you go looking for it at parts per trillion, you're probably going to find it. So we got to figure out a way to turn this around. And I think the only way you can turn around is by continuing to move forward in these projects and to prove over time that they can be protective of public health. This is a big concern on the on-site use concept. Is that, hey, it sounds great. Let's put it in a building. We'll drink our water, and we'll just have this wonderful, beneficial feedback loop. Well, as long as it's beneficial, it'll be a good feedback loop. What happens if someone gets sick? So I don't know. There's no silver bullet out there for public awareness. I think that it's like any other advancement in civilization, that if we do it well and we apply our best thinking to it, that over time people will become used to it. But I think it's going to be I think it's a tough pull, because there's a lot of folks who just simply think there's a better alternative.
We have Carol and John and then Fred.
I think when you're doing public campaigns, if you want people to work with you, if your campaign is help us, people like to help others. Campaigns that don't succeed are negative and say things like, you wasted water, shame on you. That is not helpful, and I really kind of question, get over it, when possibly the better words should be, join us, we're just speeding up nature's process. That's a different way of looking at it. One is negative, one is positive. And I can tell you, having been in that business, positive is more successful. They will join you when you ask for their help.
I think that's a lesson. That's a lesson that's been learned in a number of really successful projects. You're absolutely right.
John and then Fred and then Doug.
I just wanted to go back to one of your earlier slides. You had 1.9 billion people die each year because of bad water, basically. What did that count?
I looked it up. It should be million and not a billion.
Oh.
Well, I got those, like as I mentioned at the time, the number that I got there, if you look at the United States versus the international number, I got those from Robert Glenn. So, I took, like as I mentioned, I took that data from the slide.
So it's 1.something million.
I'm not going to defend it. Like I said, I took it from. Sorry.
Okay, back on the subject of public awareness. I think the public here in Orange County that I've interacted with on this subject of recycling water, they are willing to accept very easily the idea of groundwater recycling. It's great, 6 months of seeping into the ground. And I'll share with you an experience on one of the inspection trips that we had with the facilities. And we went out to the lakes where they take the water back out. And near where I live. And it goes back, and there's this beautiful water coming out of the spring into this pristine lake. And this woman says, one of the people that was on the tour, you mean that came from our toilets? And I said, yes. I said, the water molecule is very small. You get it out of there and it's perfectly clean. There's nothing there. And here's the Santa Ana River, which is not very nice. It smells bad, and it's not a nice looking river standing here on the levee. And I said, would you rather have that or this? And she said, oh, I see what you mean. So that's part of it. The second question I have is on the 2023, are there obstacles from the federal government and the EPA that we're factoring in here? You know, you get down the road with the state approval and everything, are they gonna turn around and say, well, you gotta do this, 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 and this? Are we working that issue?
NWRI is not. I can say that it's possible the federal government can intervene in this. I don't see how, in the context, of the broad context, it might be possible they could intervene in a particular project that had particular aspects that would invite the federal government in to regulate them. But primarily, this is kind of a state issue for regulation. And so I think we're probably okay, and I think the premise of AB 574 is that if we move forward on that initiative, that communities in California can make investments and know what the regulatory scheme is going to be.
Last question for Doug.
Yeah, well, it's more for you, Jose. There seems to be a lot of interest in public outreach. And if you recall, Water Reuse California raised $6+ million a few years ago, and part of that, a great part of that money was supposed to go toward public outreach for DPR. And maybe a good program would be to have Jennifer West come down from the executive director of Water Reuse California and say where that money's being spent or how it's being spent or what's going on in that regard.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you.
Well, let's
Thank you.
But we're not done yet. During the presentation, I noticed some people coming in. Will you please raise, if you just came in, we want to recognize you. Can you tell your name and where you work?
Rob Deason, City Manager, Simon Valley.
Welcome. Thank you. We have another guest. Who just came, no? Okay. Thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully you enjoy the program. See you next month.